I grew up playing a lot of difficult games, but Ninja Gaiden was not one of them. I knew that the game existed, but for whatever reason, I had never rented it or gave it much of a chance. It wasn't until just a year or so ago that I finally picked up Ninja Gaiden and gave it a shot. Despite not having played it when it was a newer game, it quickly climbed up into my favorite NES game list. Let's take a look at how Ninja Gaiden holds up today. This great game follows the story of Ryu Hayabusa and his quest to avenge his father. It's a fast-paced side-scrolling action platformer that uses some pretty great level design and enemy placement to challenge and entertain players. This isn't a game for the easily frustrated, but if you can knuckle down and master the gameplay, it's an excellent experience. Ninja Gaiden starts with some pretty impressive cutscenes, telling the story in one of the most cinematic experiences available on a video game at the time it was released. The music, graphics, and writing that go into these cutscenes are top-notch, though after playing the game countless times as I have done over the last year or so, I tend to skip them now. The great thing about Ninja Gaiden is that you can skip the cutscenes and still get a great experience. These story-infused sequences are fairly long, with some better than others. Most of them have a lot of action on screen, but at some points the scenes are fairly static and last pretty long, so the ability to just skip past these is pretty nice. Ryu controls great. Despite the high rate of speed in which he moves, you mostly feel in complete control of him. The controls are tight and responsive. It's pretty easy to judge your jumps and what you can and can't reach when platforming. Attacking is satisfying, with a single sword swipe enough to take out most enemies. Sub-weapons are also available to help Ryu take on various situations where his platforming skills and sword aren't enough. In addition to jumping, the ability to latch onto walls to perform wall jumps and reach higher platforms is also available. While this feels great at times, at other times it feels kinda clunky. For example, you can sometimes get Ryu caught stuck on a pillar in places where you don't want him to latch onto in the first place, leaving you wide open to enemy attack. Other times, you'll have problems jumping off a wall to attack an enemy, and the knockback from the enemy attack will throw you right back onto the wall, sending you into a damage cycle until you die. The music is some of the most high energy and intense music on the NES, and it sets the tone of the game very well. It's catchy and sounds great, with a tempo as fast as a ninja through his enemies. Some of the tracks are pretty short and loop fairly quickly, but in those instances, the levels are usually pretty short anyway, so you aren't stuck listening to them for very long unless you have a lot of problems getting through it. Speaking of having problems getting through levels, you likely will. This game is tough. The level designs are mostly great, with the exceptions being the pillars or walls I mentioned earlier. You have a very clear path to run through with plenty of enemies to cut down. The enemies are placed in very clever positions that will hinder your forward movement and knock you back into pits if you aren't careful. Ryu has a pretty generous life bar, so you can take a good amount of damage before going down. In Ninja Gaiden, the best defense is a great offense. Your best bet is to kill enemies before they have a chance to attack you. Throughout the game, you'll be able to cut down lamps, stationary birds, bugs, and other floating objects to collect sub-weapons, sub-weapon energy, health, and other goodies like bonus points and a useful time stopper. Sub-weapons include a normal throwing star that acts like a boomerang, a flame shield, an upward curving flame wheel weapon, and a jumping modification that will make you spin in an invulnerable flurry of sword slashes when jumping. These sub-weapons can be almost imperative for getting through levels unscathed. Fortunately, it is possible to get through the game without using them, but you'll either have to be an expert at noticing enemy patterns, or have memorized the level layouts and how enemies spawn. Enemies respawn very quickly if you move away from them, but they can be scrolled off screen as well. In some areas, using this trick will help get you through if you are caught without a helpful sub-weapon. There are unlimited continues and very generous checkpoints throughout Ninja Gaiden, giving you ample chance to master tricky areas without feeling like you have to lose too much ground between deaths. It's good that the creators added this into the game because you will die a lot. Enemies will more often push you into pits rather than take all your health. You are almost never thrown back too far that you don't feel like you have to start all over. For the most part, the visuals look pretty good. Enemies are drawn decently, and the backgrounds are all detailed. Bullets fired from weapons are easy to see and avoid. The overall atmosphere really harkens to an 80s action anime very well. It's a good-looking game. Not the best on the system, but it's not an ugly game. And the graphics hold up well enough that they're not negatively distracting when looked at today. Ninja Gaiden has a boss at the end of almost every chapter. After you learn the patterns of them, they aren't too tough. The first two are particularly simple, as long as you squat down and swing your sword as fast as you can. The most challenging bosses are rightfully at the very end of the game. Without spoiling anything, you fight a gauntlet of big bads, a warrior, the villain Jackio, and the final boss demon. If you are killed at any point during this final boss gauntlet, you are thrown back several stages, which also happen to be the most difficult stages in the game. This sucks, and it sucks bad. It's best to try to get through the very final stage of the game without taking any damage, and collect a good sub-weapon and enough energy to use it against the final trio. It's very hard, but it's doable with a lot of determination. The first time I beat Ninja Gaiden, I played through the final few stages after being killed by the bosses at least a good 10 times. I was determined to beat the game. Now that I've done this, I don't have nearly as hard a time with those last several stages. Lots of practice always helps, right? So does Ninja Gaiden hold up today? Absolutely, especially for those of us who grew up on the NES. As I mentioned before, I hadn't played this game until I was an adult, and it was still a very enjoyable and challenging experience. Sure, there are some flaws, such as getting knocked back to the beginning of Stage 6 if you die at the end bosses, but overall, it's a good game, and any retro gamer who hasn't played it really should give it a solid try. The game itself is still relatively affordable if you want a physical copy, but you can also pick it up on various modern Nintendo systems on the Virtual Console. Give Ninja Gaiden a shot or another playthrough if it's been a while. Later!